Colossians chapter 3. Good to see you all here tonight. We still have some visitors with us. We appreciate you being here. And as always, we're honored to have you, and we hope that you'll take the opportunity to come again. I know a lot of visitors today are here because of our mothers, and we understand that and appreciate that. But it doesn't have to be a special day like that for you to come by and visit us. We would appreciate your presence anytime. Tonight we're going to look at a lesson that I've kind of had, I wouldn't say on the back burner, but I've just kind of had other things on my mind, just trying to work my way to it. But it's something I've thought a lot about. I thought a lot about it more so, I guess, in the story of David and Bathsheba than anything. But there are really several things that can tie in with the idea of looking at something more than you should, or at someone, or at some temptation more than you should. Now, we're going to start just on the other side of that thought tonight, and that is, sometimes in life you just see things you'd rather not see, okay? And we live in a world, especially with all the outlets and all the entities we have to have communication, to have news, or to get word out, or whatever it may be. There's just a lot of things that may be unavoidable. Now, maybe some of them are, but even if you do your best, if you put all kind of guards on phones and TVs and channels and satellites and whatever, sooner or later through commercials, or through the internet, or through TV, or just being out in public, I mean, you're going to see or hear or be exposed to something that you probably don't want to be. And that's just the world we live in. The only way to get away from that is to completely cut yourself off from the entire world, and I think somehow it would probably still sneak in there somewhere, right? We all sometimes see things that we'd rather not see. Evil is everywhere, and it comes in all forms. Even sometimes in places that you would think that it wouldn't be the case. I've always been very kind of blown away by Ephesians 6 and verse 12. It says there, of course, that there's evil everywhere, but it kind of gives us a different perspective of it. In other words, that we're not really wrestling against flesh and blood. Sometimes, obviously, we can be, but we're wrestling against principalities, against powers, against rulers of the darkness of this age. Notice this, against spiritual hosts of wickedness, even in the heavenly places. Now, what does that mean? That could probably be a whole other lesson in and of itself. But the way I've always interpreted that is, we have to deal with wicked even in places, obviously, that we shouldn't. Now, in heaven, when all is said and done, obviously there won't be any room for evil there. But one story that always sticks out in my mind is the story of Job, or before Job is tempted. And it says there in the beginning of the book of Job that God's servants, I've always taken that to mean the angels, brought back to heaven kind of some reports, and they've gone back to report back to the Lord. And right there in the middle of them, Satan has exposed himself. He's brought a problem. He's brought an issue. And he goes after Job. He's in a heavenly place. So the point I'm trying to make is, if he was a problem there, obviously he's a problem pretty much everywhere we go today. So the thing I want to bring out to you tonight is, what do you do about that? You can't help but see and be exposed to things that you probably don't want to be. But that sinful second look is a problem. And that's where we definitely go astray so many times in our lives. Sometimes you see things you don't want to. If I see a needle, it doesn't matter if somebody's holding it for me or not, or whether it's on TV or in a book or whatever, I'm not doing this. I'm covering up. I'm not seeing any of it. I don't want to see needles. That's just my thing. Or it's just not my thing. I just don't do it. Now, my mother, if you were to ask her tonight what really just bothers you and creeps you out and what makes you just hide your face, it's a picture of a snake. If there's a commercial on TV or some kind of National Geographic whatever, or some kind of Animal Kingdom thing, and she sees a picture of a snake, she's done. She says, if I see them, I'll dream about them tonight, and they'll be after me. We're all probably that way, right? There's something that we just can't stand to see, whether it's something just gross or something that maybe some phobia you have, or obviously, again, in the world, there's just a lot of things that we'd rather not see. And sometimes we're quick to say, I don't want to see that, but sometimes those fingers come open and we look again to think, well, maybe it's not too bad. What does the Bible say about that? Colossians chapter 3 and in verse 1, it says, "If then you were raised with Christ, seek the things which are above, where Christ is, sitting at the right hand of God. Set your mind on things above, not on things on the earth." Now, here's the question. Why does that second look exist? The first one exists just because we're in this world, right? Now, obviously, we can put ourselves in situations that are better than others, but even in the best, sometimes we're tempted. Why does that second look exist, though? It exists because there's that tendency that we have to not keep our mind focused on things above, and then there's the enticement or the temptation to look at something again that we shouldn't be doing. I'm not talking obviously just about looking tonight. That's kind of the way we're pitching this, but we're talking about being tempted in any different way, whether it's visual or physical or whatever it is that we're involved in this life. Sometimes it's that second notion, that second time that we visit that, whether it's in our minds or with our eyes or whatever, that's where things go wrong. And it can go wrong very quickly. Tonight I want to look at some who took that second look, if you want to look at it in that way. If you want to kind of present it that way. We're going to look at, obviously, the problems that came in their lives because they continue to give attention to something they should not have. And we're also going to look at the other side of that, those who did not, and obviously what the answer is for us. All these will be familiar, nothing new here, and we'll just kind of go through some in the Old Testament, some in the New. And obviously I'm leaving out some for the sake of time, but then we'll make our points here at the end. Go all the way back to the Garden of Eden. We're going to look at Jesus' temptation in just a little bit, how Satan tempted him with the lust of the eye, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life. Same thing goes on here in Genesis chapter 3. Adam and Eve knew where that tree in the midst of the garden was at. And they also knew that they were not supposed to have any part in it. Had they seen it before? We're not told. I would assume they probably had. They had free reign in the garden. They could go about as they pleased, but they were to obviously not eat the fruit thereof. If God, as God has told them, they'd surely die, right? But it was that continual look, I don't know if you want to call it a second look or not, but it was that continual look of where Satan presented it in a different way than maybe they had ever looked at it before. And he said, God really said to you what he said in regards to this tree. Has he said you'll die? Has he said that it'll be bad? And Eve agreed to that. I said, yeah, he said that. And he says, well, that's not the whole story. Look at this side of it. Notice I said look. Look at this side of it. God is saying this, but what you're not seeing is what this will happen. So then there's that look, again, back to that tree. There's that look back to that thing that is forbidden. And that's where it all went downhill. If Adam and Eve both had said, we see your point, we hear what you're saying, but that's not an option, so we're not even looking in that direction. We're going to look this way. Well, never would have been an issue, would it? But it's that second look, or that third look, or that continual thought process that's directed in a way that it shouldn't have been. And my friends, that's why we have sin in this world. It started with another look, and another look, and some more thoughts, and playing out some more things that could be, and then here we go. See how it all starts. It's that second look that'll get you. How do you think about Cain with his brother Abel and the killing of his brother? You probably never really thought about that Cain had to look at that situation, but it seems that God understands that he's upset with his brother. Obviously, God would know all those things. And he brings that to his attention, and he said, why are you upset with your brother? But he doesn't just say, why are you upset with your brother? Why are you angry? Why is your countenance fallen? He wants him to look at it in a different perspective. So Cain's got this vision here of his brother. He's got this viewpoint, and that's what he's focusing on. And God tries to redirect. Notice Satan did the same thing. He tried to redirect their thoughts away from God. God is trying to redirect Cain's thoughts back to where they need to be. And he says, look, sin is at your door, and its desires for you, and you've got to rule over it. You need to look this way. Don't look this way. And what did Cain do? Cain looked again back at the same direction he was looking at before, and he still had the same intent on killing his brother. God gives us that option every day, and that's kind of how we're going to conclude the lesson tonight. God gives us that option to look in the right way or to look in the wrong way. We have to choose which way we're going to look. But Cain looked again back in the direction he should not, and that's why he took his brother's life. You ever looked at it that way? God gave him a good viewpoint. He just didn't want to see it from that perspective. Here's one that's literally more visual. What about Ham and the seeing of his father Noah? We know that after the flood, Noah became a farmer, if you want to call it that way, or a vine dresser, had a vineyard, took a little bit too much of his produce one day and became drunk. The way I've always interpreted that, passed out asleep in his tent, or what have you. Ham goes in there. Maybe it's by accident that he sees the nakedness of his father. Things happen. Again, sometimes you just see things you'd rather not see, right? But he goes out and he does what? He tells his brothers what's happened, and then in the process of some events, they come back and they cover him up, and everything seems to be okay, but it's not. Why? Because he shamed his father. Now, there may be a lot of things that you could discuss and different angles you could look at why he was even in there anyway and different things. But here's something I want to propose to you tonight. Sometimes, maybe by happenstance, we see or maybe get involved in things we shouldn't. Again, we live in the world that we live in. Respectfully, we could back out of those situations and just keep our mouths shut. But a lot of times, what do? We love to talk, don't we? We love to talk, we love to snicker, we love to laugh. And before you know it, we're disrespecting or we're not showing love towards somebody or defaming somebody that we have no business doing so. And ultimately, I kind of believe that's what happened here. Had he approached that in a much different way, things could have been a lot different, but we see him obviously being here, particularly the father of Canaan, and we know what the Canaanites became. Why'd that happen? Well, it happened because he looked back in a way that he shouldn't have looked back and attended to that thing that he shouldn't have seen, and he lived in it rather than moving on and showing respect. Maybe sometimes that's what we struggle with. In leaving things alone and moving on, sometimes we try to live in the past. We continue to look back, if you will, rather than moving forward. Another one that literally looked back again, you probably already guessed this, Lot's wife. Remember that? Genesis chapter 19 and verse 26, they were specifically told previous to this, when you get out of the city, you get out of the city and you do not look back. Why? Maybe that's another lesson in and of itself. It really is. I've actually done a lesson on that before. There's a number of reasons why she nor anyone else needed to look back that's escaping that city. But because of her ties there, because of her attachments there, and probably because of some of those that she loved that's still back there, maybe a number of other reasons, she looked back, turned into a pillar of salt, right? Sometimes it's hard to walk away from things in life. Sometimes we have attachments in this world. But if serving God means that we need to walk away from that, then we need to walk away from that. And the second look's not going to do you any good. It's not that you walk out of the city that you're not supposed to be in, involved in things that you're not supposed to be in, and then you look back and it's fixed itself. Chances are it's still just as bad, perhaps worse. But she couldn't let go of it for whatever reason and look back. It was that second look that got her, right? See the point? See the idea of where we're going with this tonight? Again, it couldn't have been more clear. Don't look back. Don't look again. But she did. Another story in the Old Testament, the story of Achan. Joshua 6 and Joshua 7. Jericho's walls are going to come down very soon. God gives very strict, clear instructions to His people. Those spoils that come from there, they're mine, they're not yours. There's a specific purpose for them. Leave it alone. Now, they all were going to see that. They were all going to see those spoils when those walls came tumbling down and they plundered the city. They're all going to see them. Just like we're going to see a lot of things in life that maybe are not ours, so to speak. But he continued to look at it in the wrong way. And he looked at it, and he thought about it, and he saw it to be precious, he saw it to be good, and then he starts thinking selfishly and thinking, well, maybe it's okay if I take some too. All the while knowing it's not his for the taking. But sometimes the more you look at something, the more you convince yourself, well, I need that. And I don't really care what it takes to get it. There's a lot of lessons that can come from that. But I would dare say it was that second look. Maybe he's going into the city there and he sees those spoils and he said, man, those things are shiny. Oh, it's really shiny. Oh, look at that. Whereas if they'd just gathered it up and he took it where it would belong and set it down and went on to the next task, maybe he never thought about it. But it was that second look. It was that third look. It was continually looking and thinking about what was there and thinking, you know what, that'd go real good beneath the floor of my tent. Maybe in my house one day when I get settled into this land. See how the mind works? That didn't happen with the first look. It happened with the second one, then the third, and so on. And then there's David, the one that has always intrigued me the most when it comes to another look. 2 Samuel chapter 11. Now, there's a lot of working parts in this story, and we don't have time to get to all of that tonight. But 2 Samuel chapter 11, 2 through 3 says, it happened one evening that David arose from his bed and walked on the roof of the king's house. What you don't see in these verses is what the previous verses tell you. And it was in the spring of the year when the kings would go out to battle with their people. David should never have been at home. That was the first problem. He should have never been there. He should have been out working with the people, being with the people, been in the battlefield like he should have been, but for whatever reason he was at home. We're never told why. But he arose one evening from his bed, walked on the roof of the king's house, and from the roof he saw a woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful to behold. I've always said, maybe I'm looking at this wrong, but I've always said, we live in the world that we live in, maybe he shouldn't have seen that, right? But what did David do? I'll tell you what David did. He did like a lot of men would do. He looked again. And he said, oh, wow. Knowing that was not his the whole time. And notice what the Scripture specifically says in verse 3. It says there in verse 3, so David sent and inquired about the woman. There's the key right there, isn't it? Sometimes in life we're tempted with things that obviously we shouldn't be tempted with, and we see things we shouldn't see, and maybe you can make the argument, had he been where he was supposed to have been, this never would have happened. That's a lesson in and of itself. We can get ourselves into some very tough situations because we're not where we're supposed to be. But beside that fact, where did he really go wrong? When he sent and inquired. That was an inquiry that should have never happened. Should have never happened. But that's that second look. That's what it does to you when you continue to direct your attention towards something that it shouldn't be directed towards. See the point? It's pretty simple, isn't it? Coming ahead to the New Testament, I think about the story of Demas. We're not told a lot about Demas other than 2 Timothy 4 and verse 10, that as Paul makes mention to young Timothy about him here, Demas has forsaken me, having loved this present world, and departed for Thessalonica. Paul needed him on his journey, and he abandoned him. Why? Because he loved the present world. Who wouldn't? But they had a task to do. What pulled him away from that? The fact that he had other things on his mind? Well, yeah, anybody would. Anybody would get homesick eventually. Maybe it's like John Mark in Acts chapter 15, who departed and went back home. Sometimes the struggles of this life can get the best of you. And you start thinking about, man, what's things are like back at home? Or what about going to this place over here? I know there's this work I need to be doing. I know there's this journey I need to go on. But there's all this other stuff I could be doing. And, I only live life once. And after all, it is my life. So, it's not all about doing all this other stuff. What about me sometimes? I'm not saying that Demas thought all that. I'm not saying that John Mark thought all that. But for whatever reason, they left the work of God. And it had something to do with what the world was showing them as opposed to serving God. Now, maybe anybody in a weak moment looks at that and says, it sure would be nice to go here and do this or do that. But I've got God's work to do. Well, that's the first look. But the second look says, it would really be nice. And boy, I'm tired of this tough struggle every day. We never know where we're going to sleep. We never know when our life's going to be in danger. And it ain't worth it. I'm going to do this. I feel like that's what they thought. The first look don't give you that. But the second and the third and the dwelling on that and not being focused on serving God, that's how you become a Demas or a John Mark. Now, granted, John Mark corrected it and he got things back on track, but it's because he redirected his focus and he quit looking at what he shouldn't be looking at, right? So we see the point. We see how dangerous it is to continue to look at something or to be enticed by something or to entertain thoughts in our heads and actions in our lives that shouldn't be there. Let's look at the other side of that. Eddie and I have joked about this before. I don't know what Potiphar's wife's name was, so I've just always called her Miss Potiphar. I don't know what she looked like, but I would just think that being somebody in his position and being of his prestige, I doubt very seriously she was very ugly. Okay? I may be going too far with that, but for whatever reason, she really thought Joseph was handsome. Okay? And Joseph's been given the keys to the kingdom, so to speak. Not entirely, that would come later. But he's at least been given the keys to the Potiphar residence, right? He knows what's going on there. He knows more about the ins and the outs and what's going on in Potiphar's house than even Potiphar does. And apparently that goes for his wife too. And she comes at Joseph multiple times till finally she corners him, wanting him to lie with her. And I've always been so impressed by what he said. Now, that would have been a situation where it would have been really tough to say, well, Miss Potiphar, she ain't too bad looking. and furthermore than that, I don't see anything. I don't see anybody else here. I got the key to the door. It's locked. Nobody'd ever know. Nobody'd ever catch us. She apparently wants me. Why not? See how the mind works? That's the second look. But Joseph didn't have that. No, in fact, Joseph had something far from that. Genesis 39 and in verse 9, he said, Miss Potiphar, there's no one greater in this house than I am. Nor has he, speaking of your husband, nor has he kept back anything from me because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness? Notice how he switches. He doesn't say, how then can I do this great wickedness and lie with you and lose my job? He doesn't say that. How can I do this great wickedness and sin against my God? What was his focus in life? His focus was not on a second look. His focus was not on a temptation and an avenue of life that he shouldn't be in. His focus was on the fact that God had blessed him. Even in the midst of all the bad that he'd been dealing with, God had blessed him. He realized that, and he realized that anything that he did selfishly that would involve a second look, a second evaluation, and in a direction he shouldn't be going was an insult and a disobedience to his God. You know, if we applied that principle to our life of keeping our focus as Joseph did, well, we'd make a whole lot less mistakes, wouldn't we? How simple of a formula that is, but yet he approached his life was, how can I do this against God? Any sin that we commit, you know, a lot of times we think about, well, I've hurt this person, I've hurt that person, but anything that we do in this life that is wrong is against God. And that's the way Joseph viewed it. And he said, I'm not going to do that. So rather than taking that second look, he looked again at the door and he was out. And he ran out. What an example he sets for us. I mentioned Jesus earlier. Speaking to those who would keep their focus, Jesus definitely kept his. 40 days of fasting in the wilderness, a very miraculous thing in and of itself, but you know as well as I do that if you go without food for any given amount of time, when you get really, really, really hungry, all you're going to think about is, what am I going to eat next? Right? Jesus comes out of that time, the time where Satan really was already working on him anyways, and Jesus was tempted by Satan in 3 ways. The lust of the flesh, he tempted him with food. The lust of the eye, he tempted him with all the kingdoms and all the powers in the world. And the lust of, or the pride of life itself was the idea that, well, if you are who you say you are, then just jump off of here and his angels will take care of you. He hit him with everything that he needed to hit him with to make him fall. Why did Jesus not fall? It's because he didn't look again at those rocks that would become a real good loaf of bread right then. I love some good fresh loaf of bread, don't you? That would have been good. It would have been really good. But he didn't start looking at that and thinking, Boy, that'd make a good sandwich right now. Or boy, that sure would be good with some butter spread on that. Or what? He didn't start entertaining all that as we might. He just said, "No, I'm not going there, Satan. And we're not going to do that today." He could have looked at all those kingdoms and thought, "Man, I could do this with it and do that with it and this and this." But he didn't lose his focus on all of that, realizing that ultimately he was the king anyways and would soon be forever the king. But sometimes we lose focus before we get to where we're going. And sometimes in this life, when we're put in a pinch or we're put in a fix and people press us or they insult us, we don't want to be proven wrong or we don't want to be looked down upon. And sometimes we'll look again at that and we'll say, "You know what? You're not going to make me look like that." Or you're not going to, and we'll prove ourselves even if it's right or wrong. But he didn't look at that again and again. He said, "No, I'm not going there." It's not about that. And how did he do it? He focused on the truth. Every time he answered him with Scripture. Every time. And that's the ticket for you and I to be more faithful to God, is to always look at the truth the second time, the third time, the fourth time, and to not give any more attention to the things that draws us away from Him. We've got to keep our focus. We've got to keep our focus in this life, because if we don't, we'll make some very bad decisions. And as I said earlier, in any situation that we ever face, and this is exactly what Paul told the church at Corinth, there will always be a way of escape. Always. There will always be a way of escape. As he says here, "No temptation has overtaken you, such as is common to man, but with every temptation, in particular the temptation that maybe you're tempted with, God will provide a way out of that for you." That's what he says to the church at Corinth, who were tempted in many ways. So in everything that we face in this life, we're going to have a way out. The question is, are we going to look for the way out, which is Christ? He is the way. Or are we going to look a third look at that other option, that whatever it may be is sitting over there and it looks so good? It's amazing how when you give Satan an inch, he'll take a mile. When you give him a little consideration, he makes it look even better. The longer you look at it, the better it looks. Whatever it may be. The longer you think about it, the better it looks. The longer you put it into play in your mind and in your life and what it could be like, the better it looks. But that's not the way out. That's the way downward. And the question is, will we look for the way out, or will we look back into sin? I'll tell you what the answer is. The answer is to kill that old man off, because that's really our problem. Our problem is not so much the issue at hand, it's the issue that used to be at hand and we just hadn't done away with it yet. That's our problem. What does it say in Romans 6 and in verse 6? "Knowing this, that our old man was crucified with him, that the body of sin might be done away with, that we should no longer be slaves of sin." Ephesians 4 and verse 22, "That you put off concerning your former conduct the old man, which grows corrupt according to the deceitful lusts." What are we saying? What we're saying is literally what it says there. Crucify the old man with the old ways, and if he's dead, if he's put away, if he's locked away, there's nothing else to look back to. Let me ask you something. Why do we keep half the junk that we keep in this life? I want you to think about that. Why do we keep so much stuff tucked away in the closet, tucked away in the attic, shoved up on the house, stuck out in the storage building or in the shop, or either we rent a storage building, and a lot of people do, right, Steve? We rent these, and people just put all this stuff. Why do we have so much stuff that we never use? Julie's heard me say it before and about some of the kids stuff. You know, if it's in this corner, or if I've been tripping over this for a month, chances are they don't really need it. So we're finna get rid of it. But why do we hold on to that stuff? Because we think one day we might need it, right? And maybe we do. Chances are probably we don't. But we think, one day, oh, I might need that. And that's exactly why we don't kill that old man. Because we think, one day I might want to look at him again. Oh, I know it's not right. I know that I'm not that anymore, and I know I'm on this path to this. But maybe, just maybe, I want to look back and entertain that life again. You see, if we kill that old man, if we really crucify the old man, if we really make that change that we're supposed to make, that second look is never a problem. But as long as we know that he's lurking over there in the shadow somewhere, it's always that temptation to kind of ease around and say, you still over there? I might call on you again one day. Friends, it's possible to become a child of God and to never really be changed. And that's, I think, one of our biggest challenges in this life. We become Christians, we get on the right path, we do the right things, but we've never really fully made the change and flipped that switch in the way we need to. We hold on to certain parts that make us look back. Romans chapter 12 and verse 2, and then the lesson will be yours. Paul simply says, don't be conformed to this world. That's what looking again makes you do. It makes you kind of conform back and gel back to what you once were. But he says there, be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is good and acceptable in the perfect will of God. I tell you what is good and perfect will of God has nothing to do with looking at temptation the second time. Again, sometimes in this life we see things we shouldn't. We live in a world that's set up that way, and it's just tough. There will always be temptations, but when you look again and you entertain again and you think some more and you take a few steps that way, it's already going downhill. Keep your focus on who you're supposed to keep your focus on, like Joseph did. And regardless of what situation we're in, it's all about him. That's our first look. That's our second look. And that's our only look. And always be focused like Jesus was on the truth. And never entertain what the devil's trying to get us to think. Because I guarantee you, every time it's wrong. Maybe tonight you've been looking in such a way and dwelling in certain places and being involved in things you shouldn't be. And I hope and pray tonight you'll stop that. And if it's of a private nature, ask God to help you with it, and He'll do so. But it may be tonight that you need encouragement from the church here to pray for you and with you in regards to that. We'd be happy to do so. Maybe tonight you've never become a Christian. You've been thinking about it. It's been on your heart, been on your mind. But there's been that other viewpoint over here that just kind of keeps pulling you back. I think tonight the message is clear. You've got to cut that viewpoint off. And you've got to focus on the one that matters. And maybe tonight you're ready to become a Christian and to become obedient to God, confessing Christ, repenting of your sins, and be baptized. We can help you with that tonight as well. Tonight, if you're subject in any way, won't you come while we stand and while we sing.